I clearly remember the day my children were torn from my arms. The sound of the chains, the screams of others, everything seemed to happen in slow motion, but the pain never fades. I was just a man, but at that moment I lost what I loved most. The separation was brutal, without explanation, without compassion. They were just babies, and I was a slave, powerless in front of the cruelty of that system. Today, decades later, I still hear their cries echoing in my mind, a sound that never fades. I never saw my children again, and I don't know if I'll ever have the chance to embrace them again. But the question that consumes me is, do they still remember me? This is the story of a man who, despite everything, never lost hope of one day, somehow reuniting with his children. I remember how the sun seemed so distant that day. The light that illuminated the plantation fields didn't have the same shine as before. It felt more like a shadow that demanded a price no one should ever pay. I was there again, working hard, my hands calloused and my heart heavy. But the weight of the work was nothing compared to the weight of what was about to happen. At first, it seemed like the day would go on as any other, but soon the tension filled the air. I never saw those men before, but the look in their eyes was cold, like the steel of a blade. They arrived with an intent I couldn't comprehend at the time. I never knew where they came from or what they truly wanted, but I knew deep down that nothing good could come of them. It was when I saw my wife's eyes that I understood something was terribly wrong. There was a fear in her gaze, something I had never seen in her before. She looked at our children, so small, so innocent, and it was as if she knew what was coming. Suddenly, everything turned blurry. The sound of chains hitting the ground, the scream of my oldest son, trying to pull away from the men who held him. I tried to get closer, tried to shout, but my voice failed me at the most crucial moment. My wife tried to run, but one of the men grabbed her arm with such force. They got closer, and one of them looked at me with disdain and said, "This is not the place for children." My vision blurred as they took our children and dragged them away. They were babies, so fragile. I saw them struggling, trying to understand what was happening. Their cries still echo in my mind, a sound that haunts me to this day. And me? I could only watch. I was paralyzed, held by something bigger than me, bigger than any pain I had ever known. I tried to run after them, but one of the men shoved me with such force that I fell to the ground. My chest ached, my heart felt like it was going to leave my body, but there was nothing I could do. They were taken, and I was left behind, not understanding how this could be real. How could the world be so cruel? How could I be so powerless in the face of this? I saw them being taken away, their small bodies distant from mine, and in that moment, something inside me died. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that they were taken from me or the fact that I didn't have the chance to say goodbye. The air felt heavy, and the dust of the plantation seemed even more suffocating. I looked around at the other slaves, but no one could help me. The fear they felt was written on all their faces, as if they feared that, by trying to help, the punishment would be even worse. So I was left behind, alone, with a pain that consumed me. My wife was no longer by my side, and I didn't know if she was still alive. I only knew that, in that moment, I lost everything I had that was precious. What hurt the most was the uncertainty. Not knowing where my children were being taken, who would care for them, if they would be suffering. The uncertainty gnawed at me from the inside, more than any physical pain I had ever endured. I knew what those men did to slaves, to children. They weren't seen as human, they weren't treated as living beings. They were just objects, pieces in a cruel, inhumane system. And I couldn't know what would happen to my children. That night, as silence settled over the field, I was alone in the dark. I heard the sound of my breath and the weight of loneliness, but the cries of my children never left my head. They were out there, somewhere far from me, not understanding what had happened, not knowing that the father who loved them was no longer with them. The pain of separation was deeper than any whipping I had ever felt. I felt like I was dying inside, and the only thing left was the memory of their smiles, their small faces, now far away. I spent the following weeks wandering the plantation, doing what I was told, but not really being there. My mind was distant, traveling to a place where my children were still safe, where they could still run into my arms and where the love I felt for them hadn't been ripped away. But reality was harsh, and I knew that the separation was only the beginning. I didn't know when or how, but I knew I would have to do something to find my children, to at least know if they were alive. But that night, the only thing I knew for sure was that the emptiness inside me would never be filled. The sound of my children's cries, the sound of the chains, was still with me, following me, haunting me as I tried to figure out what I would do next. The following days were a blur. I didn't know if the sun was shining or if the rain was falling, if it was morning or night. Time seemed to have stopped, or maybe it was me who was paralyzed, waiting for it all to be a nightmare I would wake up from. But I never woke up. With each new dawn, the emptiness inside me grew deeper. Hours passed, but my mind remained stuck in the moment when my children were taken, in that distant cry that echoed in my head. An echo that never faded. I felt like a shadow, walking among people but never truly present. The weight of loneliness crushed me. I was torn from the world, ripped from my own soul, and it felt like a punishment with no end. There was no comfort in the other slaves, not even in the words they tried to offer. No one could truly understand me. They too lived in pain, but my pain was unique. It was a pain that came from the depth of my soul, a black hole that consumed everything mercilessly. I was lost in a sea of uncertainty, and the longing for my children tormented me like a fire that wouldn't go out. In the first few days, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I wondered if I had done something wrong, if I could have done something differently to prevent this from happening. But the answers never came. I clung to those memories, but they were like sand slipping through my fingers. I remembered every smile, every laugh, how they used to run around me, but all of that now seemed like a distant life, a life that might never exist again. The thought that they might have been taken far from me, to a place where I would never find them, was unbearable. Nights were the worst. When silence took over everything and I found myself alone, the sound of chains, the distant cries of children, and the screams still echoed in my mind. It was all I could hear. I was awake, but it felt like sleep had abandoned me. My eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but I couldn't sleep. The fear that the dawn would bring another dose of suffering, another reminder of what was taken from me, kept me on edge. And when I finally tried to close my eyes, their image, small and helpless, being taken away, would consume my thoughts. There was no rest, no relief. The emptiness became a constant presence. It was as if my soul had been ripped from me, and I wandered aimlessly, searching for something to fill the hole that now existed inside of me. But nothing seemed enough. Nothing gave me peace. Nothing gave me solace. The words of others were empty. The gestures of comfort were nothing but gestures. They didn't know they couldn't know. How could they understand the pain of a father who had lost his children in such a cruel way? I began to lose myself in memories, but even they seemed to fade away, as if time were trying to erase every fragment of that happiness I once knew. When I found myself thinking about what happened to them, a wave of anger would wash over me. Anger at the system, anger at the men who took my children from me, anger at the fate that condemned me to this life of suffering. But I also felt a deep fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear that my children were suffering, that they were being treated like animals, without dignity, without love. Fear that they would never know how much I loved them. Amidst all of this, I began to realize something that plagued me even more: the lack of control. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know if they were okay. I didn't know if they were alive. There was no way to act, no way to do anything to change the situation. I had no power. All I could do was wait and suffer. But this suffering seemed eternal, as if time itself were conspiring against me, forcing me to relive the same pain every day. I was trapped in a life I didn't choose, with a fate that seemed crueler than any I could have imagined. In the days that followed, my mind grew more clouded. I began to question everything, even my own will to continue. Why should I live like this? Why should I go on in a world that took from me what I loved most? There were no answers. And the more I questioned, the more the answers seemed elusive. All I knew was that something inside me was broken, something that could never be fixed. The emptiness was so deep that I didn't know who I was anymore without my children. I felt like a lost man, without hope, without direction. And yet, amid all this darkness, a small spark of hope still burned inside me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me keep going. The hope that somehow I could still find them. The hope that in some way I could still reunite my family as the last vestige of the love that bound us. But for now, that hope was all I had, and even though it was small, it was what kept me alive. Days turned into weeks, and the world around me seemed to lose all color. It was as if life itself had turned gray, and I was walking through a fog that refused to lift. The pain of losing my children was not something that could be measured by time. It was something that lived in every moment, in every breath I took. It was the kind of pain that grows deeper the longer you carry it. But as the days passed, something in me began to shift. I had to keep going. I had no choice. The plantation never stopped, and neither did the work. The fields demanded their toll, and I couldn't afford to waste time mourning. But I wasn't the same man I was before. I was a hollow version of myself, moving through the motions, trying to survive in a world that didn't care. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was always in a different place. My thoughts were with my children. Were they still alive? Were they safe? Had they been treated like animals like I once was? These questions consumed me, but I couldn't let myself fall apart. I couldn't afford the luxury of grief. Not yet. The men who had taken them were still out there, and every day I lived with the hope, though it felt like a distant memory, that I would somehow find them. But each time I thought I was getting closer, the walls grew higher. I didn't know where to look or who to trust. The few people I had confided in had disappeared, as if the very thought of helping me was too dangerous. I had no allies. No one could help me, not in the way I needed. But there was one thing I did know. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. And so, I pushed through the pain day after day. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the dark sky, wishing for just a glimpse of them. A sign, anything to tell me that they were still out there. Sometimes I would hear the rustling of the leaves, and for a brief moment, I would imagine it was them coming back to me. But it was always a dream. It was always just the wind. And every morning when the sun rose, the reality of my situation would sink in again. But I refused to give up. I started doing things I never thought I would. I approached strangers, asked questions that had no answers, and followed leads that seemed to go nowhere. The world around me was indifferent to my suffering. I was just one more face in the crowd, just another broken man in a system built to break us all. But something deep inside me refused to let go of the hope that I might one day find them. I was no longer just trying to survive. I was searching for redemption. I was searching for my children, for a piece of myself that had been lost. The struggle was exhausting, and I could feel my strength draining, both physically and emotionally. But there was something in me that kept pushing forward. A flicker of light in the darkness. I had to believe that I would find them. Even if it meant risking everything. Even if it meant losing myself along the way. Because if I gave up, then I would have lost everything. My hope, my reason to breathe. And I couldn't afford that. But each day was harder than the last. The weight of my own survival pressed down on me like the chains I once wore, and the memories of my children, their faces, their laughter, became both my greatest motivation and my deepest sorrow. I didn't know how long I could keep going like this. But I knew one thing, I couldn't stop. Not until I found them. And so I carried on. If you feel this story in your heart, I ask you, please stay with me and subscribe. I need to share this pain, this hope with you. As time wore on, I began to realize that no matter how much I tried to bury the past, it would never leave me. The memories of my children haunted me in every quiet moment, in every shadow that passed by. They were no longer just thoughts. They were ghosts that followed me, clinging to every corner of my existence. In the early days, I thought the pain would eventually fade, that I would get used to it. But it never did. Instead, it only grew stronger, more unbearable. I would close my eyes at night, and there they were, small faces, innocent smiles, the sound of their laughter ringing in my ears. My children. The sound of their voices, so full of life, became a song that played on repeat in my mind. I couldn't escape it. The faces I had held in my arms, the faces that once called me Daddy, were now just a blur, a memory that slipped further from my reach with each passing day. I remembered how they used to run around me, their tiny feet pounding the dirt, their laughter filling the air. I remember the warmth of their little hands in mine, the way they looked up at me with so much trust, so much love. It was the purest form of love I had ever known. And yet, in the blink of an eye, it was all taken from me. Some nights, I would sit alone in the dark, holding on to these memories as though they were the last remnants of a life I could never return to. I'd remember their faces, their voices, the way they looked at me as if I were their protector. The pain of losing them was deeper than anything I had ever felt, and it made me question the very meaning of my existence. What was the point of survival if it meant living without them? In those moments, I felt as though I was drowning in the memories. It wasn't just the absence of their presence that hurt, it was the absence of the future I had imagined for them. The future I had planned to build with them, to see them grow, to be there for their first steps, their first words, their first successes. All of that was taken away, and in its place, I was left with nothing but silence. A silence so loud it was deafening. I couldn't help but wonder what they were doing now. Were they safe? Were they alive? How could they be? I had been robbed of my family, of my future. The world had taken them, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered. The pain of those memories became my constant companion. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to resurface whenever I allowed myself to think of them. And it hurt. It hurt in a way that words couldn't describe. It wasn't just the physical ache of missing them, it was the emotional weight of knowing that I had been unable to protect them, to keep them safe. But even in the midst of this pain, I couldn't let go of them. I refused to. They were my children, my flesh and blood, and I would carry them with me for as long as I had breath in my lungs. I would carry them through every moment of suffering, through every trial and tribulation, because they were my reason to keep going. They were the fire that burned in my chest, the fire that refused to be extinguished, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. And so, I clung to those memories no matter how painful they were. They were all I had left of my children. They were my link to them, the only connection I had. And as long as I could remember them, I could still feel their presence, still feel their love. Even if it was just in my heart, it was enough to keep me moving forward, one step at a time. As time passed, I began to realize something I had been too afraid to admit to myself. I was no longer just searching for my children. I was searching for something deeper, something I couldn't name. It was redemption. Not just for them, but for myself. In the early days, I had clung to the hope that one day I would find them. But now, I was beginning to understand that I needed to find a way to make peace with the life I had lived and the choices I had made. I had to reconcile the man I was before with the man I had become after losing them. The pain didn't disappear, but it had taken on a new shape, a new form. It wasn't just about longing for them anymore, it was about the emptiness of knowing that I couldn't change the past. The reality was that my children were out there somewhere, and there was nothing I could do to reverse what had been done. But still, I couldn't stop myself from wanting to make it right. I wanted to believe that there was a way to fix this, to make the world right again. But the more I searched for answers, the more I felt like I was chasing a shadow. The harder I looked, the further away they seemed to be. And so, I found myself caught in a cycle of constant longing, where every step I took felt like I was getting further from them rather than closer. The more I thought about them, the more the pain deepened. It was a twisted kind of torture, knowing they were out there but not knowing where or even if they were okay. It was a helpless feeling, one that made my chest tight and my heart ache with each breath I took. I had to keep moving. I had to keep searching. But there were days when it felt like I couldn't go on. There were days when the weight of the loss became too much to bear. I tried to keep my mind busy, to focus on survival. But the truth was, survival had lost its meaning. What was the point of surviving if I couldn't find them? What was the point of continuing to exist if I didn't know if my children were alive? Every day I woke up, I thought of them. Every night I lay down, I thought of them. They were my first thought and my last thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed them. I should have done something. I should have fought harder. But instead, I had watched as they were taken from me, powerless to stop it. The anger came in waves. Sometimes it would be a small trickle, simmering beneath the surface, and at other times, it would come crashing over me like a wave. I would rage at the men who had taken them, at the world that had allowed this to happen, at myself for not being able to protect them. It was a wild, uncontrollable feeling, one that threatened to consume me whole. But it didn't. I wouldn't let it. I couldn't afford to lose myself to anger, not when there was still a chance to find them. I began to question everything. I questioned the world, the system that had taken my children from me, and even myself. How could this world be so cruel? How could people be so heartless? And yet, there I was, one man standing against it all, with nothing but the remnants of hope and love to keep me going. I wasn't the same man I had been before, and I never would be. The loss of my children had transformed me, broken me in ways I couldn't even put into words. But it had also made me stronger in a way I never expected. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I couldn't afford to give up. And so I kept searching. I didn't know how and I didn't know where, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. There were days when I felt like I was on the edge of falling apart, but somehow I always found the strength to take one more step. There were days when the grief threatened to consume me whole, but somehow I always found a way to push it down. I wasn't going to let the pain win. Not yet. I wasn't going to let it take everything from me. Every step I took felt like a small victory. Every day I survived was a testament to my strength, even if I couldn't see it. And though I didn't know if I would ever find my children, I knew one thing for sure: I would never stop searching for them. I would never stop fighting for them, for the family I had lost, and for the man I was becoming. It didn't matter how long it took, how many days, how many years. I would keep searching. Because without that hope, without that search, I had nothing. I can't say exactly when it happened. I can't pinpoint the exact moment when I decided that I had to stop surviving and start living again. Maybe it was the weariness of not knowing if my children were alive, or maybe it was the crushing weight of living in the dark, waiting for a light that never seemed to appear. But something changed within me. And when it did, I knew there was no turning back. I was tired of standing still. Tired of letting life pass me by. There had to be something I could do, something more than just waiting. There had to be a way to find them. I had to believe that. Because without belief, there was no reason to keep going. The pain, the longing, it had been with me long enough. Now it was time to act. I started asking more questions. I began reaching out to people I had never spoken to before, even those who were once too afraid to cross paths with me. I didn't care if they had answers or not. I didn't care if they thought I was a fool. My children were still out there and I was going to find them. I was no longer content to sit back and let the world take what it wanted from me. I wasn't just looking for my children anymore. I was looking for something that could restore a piece of my soul. I walked through villages and towns, knocked on doors, and spoke to strangers who might know something, anything that could lead me to them. Every lead was a thread, and I followed each one with an urgency that only a father could understand. Some people were kind. Some looked at me like I was a madman, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose again. And with that purpose, something else began to grow inside me: hope. It was a fragile hope, like a tiny flame flickering in the wind, but it was there. And that was all I needed. Because if I could still hope, I could still act. I started to move with a kind of determination I hadn't felt in so long. I was no longer just surviving. I was fighting. Fighting for my children, for my life, and for the man I had always been beneath the weight of the chains. Every night, I lay awake in the dark, not from the weight of my grief, but from the possibilities that lay ahead. I wasn't alone in my search. I carried them with me, their faces still etched in my mind, but now, instead of just remembering, I was actively seeking. Every step I took, every door I knocked on, was a step closer to them. I began to believe that it wasn't just a dream anymore. It was something real, something within reach. But even as I felt the hope growing inside me, I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I couldn't allow myself to get too carried away, to lose focus. It had been too long and too much had happened. The reality was that I might never find them. They could have been lost to me forever, just like so many others who had been torn apart by this cruel world. But even if that was the case, I had to know. I had to try. If I gave up now, if I stopped looking, I would never forgive myself. I had spent years living in the shadow of what was lost. I had spent too long mourning, too long suffering. But now I was ready. Ready to fight, ready to search, ready to do whatever it took to find them. Because even if the world tried to take them from me, it could never take my love for them. That love was the only thing that had kept me going, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The fear still lingered. It would always linger. The fear of never finding them, the fear of losing them forever, the fear of facing a world where they no longer existed. But I pushed the fear aside. Fear had never gotten me anywhere. Only action could do that. And so I began again. A new chapter in this long, painful journey. A journey that had already cost me so much, but one that I couldn't turn away from. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. I had lost my children once, but I would never lose my hope again. I don't know if the journey I began all those years ago ever truly ends. People say that time heals all wounds, but I've lived long enough to know that some wounds never truly heal. They may fade, they may scab over, but they remain there, deep beneath the surface, always reminding you of what was lost. The years I spent searching for my children, the years I spent haunted by memories of their faces, have shaped me into someone I barely recognize. I started this journey as a man desperate for answers, desperate to reclaim what was taken from me. But in the end, I realized that the answers I was looking for might never come. Maybe my children were lost to me forever. Maybe the world had taken too much for me to ever get it back. But one thing was certain, I had to live with the memories, not the regret. I've learned to live with the pain, the empty space where their laughter should have been. I've learned that some things are simply out of our control. The world is cruel, but it is also beautiful in its way, even in its harshest moments. I spent so many years blaming myself, blaming the world, blaming the men who took them from me. But in the end, I came to realize that anger does not bring peace. It only keeps you trapped in the past. The only way to move forward is to let go of that anger, even if just a little bit. The search, the endless questioning, the wondering of where they are and what they are doing may never stop. But it's different now. The pain doesn't have the same hold on me. I don't know if I'll ever find them. I don't know if I'll ever hold them in my arms again. But I know this, I've done everything I can. I've given everything. I've walked through fire, I've suffered more than anyone should, and I've lived to tell this story. What happens next is out of my hands. All I can do is continue to live, continue to breathe, and continue to honor the love I still have for them. As I stand here, reflecting on everything that has happened, I find a strange sense of peace. It's not the peace I imagined when I first set out, but it is peace nonetheless. It is the peace that comes from accepting what cannot be changed and finding strength in what is left. The love I have for my children is not lost, not ever. It is carried with me in every step I take, in every breath I draw. It is the one thing that will never be taken from me. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I will keep walking, no matter how heavy the burden. And even if I never find them, even if I never get the answers I sought, the journey itself has taught me something valuable. It has taught me that love, even in its most painful form, is something worth fighting for. If my story has touched you, if my pain has resonated with you in some way, I ask you, stay with me. Subscribe and let's continue walking this path together through the next chapter, through the next story. Sometimes all we have is each other.